Damn, this was just a densely packed demo, wasn't it? There's just so much content to dig into. So let's do just that. This is going to be a free-form analysis talking about things I've uncovered in the demo, the references Dead by Daylight players have pointed out to me, and, of course, the goofs and errors I picked up on. Should be a blast, question mark. The demo opens with a character named Augustine Liber announcing that she's some kind of an ageless mystic who's been researching the entity since discovering its existence hundreds of years ago. She seems to believe that Frank Stone is the key she's going to be able to use to open a link between the entity's realm and Earth. At this point, we're a little fuzzy as to the how that's going to happen or what the result will be. But apparently it will change everything. More importantly, though, this ties back to the very first video I made about the announcement teaser, and more specifically, how we're supposed to be interpreting the title. If Frank Stone is being cast as a Dead by Daylight killer, who's the one doing the casting? Well, now we have our answer. It's Augustine Liber. So, who is Augustine Liber? The name doesn't have a ton of clues. St. Augustine was an early Christian philosopher, and Liber is the way of saying dear in German, as well as implying a better or wiser way of doing things, or a way to express a preference for one thing over another. So not a lot to dig into there, but given that Supermassive Games has expressed a major fondness for aptronyms in the past, definitely something to keep an eye on. So, the question becomes, just how involved in Frank Stone's life story is Augustine? This document shows us that when he was in prison for assault and robbery, she treated him, confirmed that he was getting rehabilitated, and recommended him for early release. She was responsible for getting him into the steel mill, which would go on to be the site of his various crimes. But, did she have a concrete reason for doing that? Does she have more influence in town beyond getting Frank a job at the steel mill? It seems like the local sheriff is doing a terrible job of investigating Frank Stone's crimes. Is she pulling Cusick's strings as well somehow? We know that she's very interested in keeping Frank's killing spree going. She's likely the person who tries to kill Sam with a section of pipe before his showdown with Frank. So how far does her plan extend? I've got a theory about this, but it's pretty crazy, so let's save it for the end of the video, shall we? Seriously though, I know I'm famously terrible at identifying faces, but is that Christine? Or someone who looks uncannily like her? So, it's super weird that Sam shows up alone at the mill, right? He appears late at night to ask what's been going on, then searches the place himself when Tom proves super unhelpful. Why is he at the mill? Has some evidence suggest that the killer might be connected to it? If so, we certainly haven't heard about it. Why is he searching this giant place in the dark, completely alone? There's a bunch of evidence that Sam's not here on official business. The first clue? Look at the badge he presses up against the window. It says Oregon Police Department. So he's a state cop, not a Cedar Hills deputy. Not only can you go through the whole conversation with Tom without finding this out, Sam is weirdly cagey about admitting it. If the conversation slants so that Tom assumes Sam is a local deputy, Sam will not correct him.
Well, heck, if you don't believe me, ask your boss.
My boss?
Sheriff Kusich.
Right. My boss.
Now, if directly asked, Sam will say that he's a state cop who's been sent to help with the investigation into the missing boy. But he won't volunteer that information.
Officer Sam Green.
You ain't one of Kusich's deputies, are you?
My captain has loaned me to Sheriff Kusich as additional manpower for the duration of this investigation.
Oh, you mean the business with the missing boy?
That's right.
I think there's a specific reason that Sam is at the steel mill that night, and it's something that hasn't been revealed to us yet. He's a real state cop, of course, but I suspect he's acting under his own initiative here. Okay, is the baby Robert or isn't it? Up until I played this demo, I'd assumed that Frank Stone was going to live and be transported bodily into the entity's realm, and also that it was impossible to kill the baby because the baby was Robert and Sam's there looking for his kidnapped son, or possibly Jaime since he needed to be one of the main characters. The demo has killed most of these assumptions. Sam always murders Frank Stone, even if it costs him an eye and a working shoulder to do it. And since the baby can die, it can't be Robert, since he always appears in the murder mill sequence. Unless, of course, Supermassive pulls some crazy hidden agenda style trickery, and there's a second character who can perform most of Robert's scenes in the main game if the baby gets killed. But that would be a huge amount of work, so the baby must not be Robert. Unless... I didn't see that baby die. Did you? In the worst possible version of the showdown with Frank, we see the wicker baby basket dropped into the slag pool, and the final fate-decided statement changes from saying that Sam killed Frank Stone and saved the child to just saying that Sam killed Frank Stone. It doesn't say anything about the baby. So, is it possible that the baby survives no matter what? If you go through the correct series of conversational choices, Sam can convince Tom to step up and act heroically. The result of this is an update to Sam's fate, announcing that he's put his faith into Tom. How has his fate been changed by doing so? What would a more confident and heroic Tom do to help out? I haven't seen him in the Frank Stone fight, no matter how I played, so it's got to happen after that. What if it's right afterwards? Now, I know this is a stretch, but take a look at the melting pool. A bunch of scrap metal has just been dropped into it. That's what Frank Stone gets impaled on at the end of the game. You'll notice, though, that he's not immediately catching on fire. What if there's a similarly large bunching of metal spikes right where the baby basket falls, and the basket lands on it rather than directly into the molten metal? That would mean, in a worst-case scenario, Sam collapses into unconsciousness while a baby is sitting in a basket just moments away from falling into the metal and burning to death. Could this be where Tom and the changed fate comes in? It could be that if Tom has been properly encouraged, he'll act as a backstop, rushing in to pull the baby out of the fire if everything else goes wrong. But what if Tom hasn't been properly encouraged? Then perhaps he gets to the furnace a little later, still rescuing the baby, but only after the basket has caught fire. In this version, if the baby was Robert, then the 1980 version of him would have scars. Now we know this kind of thing is possible since it's already been established that Sam will be able to lose an eye and have a damaged shoulder in the 1980 timeline. So why not a scarred back or arms on Robert that only comes up a couple of times in the story? Check out the fate descriptions that come up after the confrontation with Frank Stone. If you save the baby, that's the text. But if you let the baby get dropped in the pit, here's the official text. And again, it doesn't mention anything about the baby here. There's no "you failed to save the baby." No, the baby was sacrificed. The baby's fate is unresolved as far as this menu is concerned. Do I have any reason to believe that that's what's going on? Not yet. I'm just outlining how it's entirely possible that the baby might still be Robert. Supermassive interactive movies tend to follow a pretty similar structure. We start with a prologue, then we meet a storyteller character who speaks directly to the player before continuing on with the story. Dr. Hill in Until Dawn, the curator in Dark Pictures games, Eliza in The Quarry. Hidden Agenda is the exception. We've seen no clips of a similar character in Frank Stone, but there is one clue pointing in that direction, as well as creating a possibility that the 1963 section is not the first part of the game we're going to be playing. Check out this sequence menu. This is where we go over the secrets we found in the game so far. Look at these three sections, one each devoted to an aspect of the story. The only one we've checked off so far is The Champion, obviously a reference to clues about Frank Stone, because he's Augustine's pet killer. The other two clue lines are Murder Mill, presumably secrets we uncover about the film, and The Storyteller, which may refer to Augustine, since it's her monologue that introduces the story. One thing worth noting, though, is that the storyteller clues are to the left of Frank Stone. While this positioning isn't necessarily meaningful, convention suggests that the first clue you'll find will be on the leftmost side of the screen, which suggests that we might learn something about the storyteller before the 1963 section of the game. After all, we're told at the start of the demo that this is part 1. Does that mean we'll get a glimpse of Jacket Lady and the start of the Murder Mill investigation in a playable prologue before part 1? Could we be spending the whole game jumping back and forth through timelines? Or are we going to be locked in chronological order? Check out the fate screen here with Sam. we've got 3 time periods: 1963, Murder Mill, which is presumably 1980, and I'm guessing some kind of a present day, although it's impossible to be sure just yet. Note, though, that there's 5 distinct slots for characters' fates. We've been told time and again that there are 4 playable characters, including the suggestion that it's an appropriate game for 1 to 4 players in hot seat mode. So why are there 5 slots here? It can't be that 1 is for Sam and then the rest are for the Murder Mill crew, because A, then there's no room for Jacket Lady, who we know is playable, and 2, if it were, there'd be no reason for 3 time periods to switch between at the top of the screen. So who's the 5th fate? Will Bonnie have her own fate screen despite not being playable? Does Sam have his own fate track in the present day even if he's not playable there? Something interesting is going to be happening with this screen. That's all I'm sure of. When we first take control of Sam, we're told exactly what time it is: 9:07 p.m. This happens in every supermassive interactive movie. It started out as a functional element in the game until dawn. As the title suggested, the gameplay was always counting down until dawn, so it's important to constantly let the player know how much time is passing, whether it makes sense or not. But that's another video. The point is, putting the time on screen became a part of Supermassive's house style, something you'll always notice when playing their games, whether it's relevant to the plot, as in House of Ashes, or not, like the rest of the Dark Pictures. While the omniscient narrator, that is the Chiron writer, establishes the time as 9:07, the clocks inside the planet aren't so sure. First up, we have Frank Stone's clock, which establishes the time as 9:02. Fun fact, the clock on Frank Stone's wall in the Hidden Object game reads 9 p.m. So maybe this is set right before he sat down to work on his mask, and Merlin walks up to him. When Sam gets to the first indoor area, the clock on the wall reads 9:05. So we've already got a mismatch with the objective time. And then the next clock is off again, but strangely, it's earlier than the last one. This clock gets introduced in a cutscene, and it's always just switching over from 9:01 to 9:02 when you get there. This isn't really a goof. It's a completely normal thing for a bunch of different clocks to have slightly different times if no one's keeping a close eye on them. Since I was headed out to the beach right after gathering footage, I decided to leave the recorder going to test whether the in-game clocks would keep accurate time. The result was something a little weird. Check this out. The clocks keep perfect time on a minute-to-minute basis, but a full spin around the dial only moves the hour hand 1/2 of an hour. The only explanation? These are actually 24-hour clocks that someone accidentally put the wrong faceplate on. When Sam first meets Tom, the guard is psyched to talk about his best friend Merlin, a Doberman Pinscher who's super loyal. Unless, of course, you give him scritches and a bucket full of human innards, in which case he goes demon real fast. The most notable thing about this guy? How tiny he is. At first I thought it was just a perspective thing, but no, he's barely taller than the bucket the guts were in. We can confirm his height as he runs by the door. Now let's check out Tom standing next to the door. Merlin wouldn't even come up to his knee. I did not know that toy Dobermans were a thing. Maybe the fact that he's so tiny is why his collar is so loose. Here you can see it flopping around on the shadow as he chows down on his bucket of human meat. If you go down this conversational path, Tom will vent all of his feelings about how terrible a person Sheriff Cusick is, going so far as to suggest that Sam would be a better person to be in charge of law enforcement in Cedar Hills. The clips we've seen of Sam in front of a police car in the 1980s suggest that that will, in fact, wind up being the case. By fully exploring the storm drains, Sam can find this piece of metal. If you pay attention to the spike pattern, you'll recognize it as the lower portion of Frank Stone's welding mask, which he's cut off to reveal his mouth. It's effectively the lower jaw and chin section of the mask that Frank has removed, and that's the exact part of his face that gets torn off by the spike after he falls into the fire pit. The demo is absolutely loaded with references to Dead by Daylight lore, so let's look over the ones that have been pointed out by helpful viewers. This chess piece is an add-on for the Doctor. Sam's badge number, 424, if translated to the alphabet, turns into DBD. When fighting Frank Stone, Sam can blind him with a flashlight, a key mechanic in Dead by Daylight. Augustine standing by a campfire is how survivors wait for their trial to begin. Is she hearing a killer arrive as she turns to look? Sam getting pinned to the post is a lot like a killer's hooking survivors. The item pickup sound effect is from Dead by Daylight. Crawling for an objective while injured is a huge part of Dead by Daylight, although Dead by Daylight survivors can't grab a gun and finish off the killers, sadly. The relics turn out to be cute dolls of 12 different Dead by Daylight killers. We've already seen the twins in another video, and now we've got Hillbilly. More on this guy later. Also, in case it wasn't clear, relic is killer spelled backwards. And Behavior Interactive, if you want to make and sell these for like $30, $35 Canadian each, I will absolutely buy them. Just putting that out there. This box is a display case for pewter figurines that seem to reference various Dead by Daylight killers. The iridescent king belongs to the Doctor, and this pewter wooden horse may be linked to Frank Stone, because it was featured in the Workbench Hidden Object game. As for the rest, we'll have to try and figure out who they represent. No idea what this thing is. This looks like a scythe. This could be a feather, maybe a skull here. No idea about the start of the second row. This is pretty clearly a cat. I'm going to go with priest for this one. This honestly looks like a woodworking plane, but that's a crazy thing to say. This sword could reference the knight, and this hammer reminds me of the Hillbillies Club, but it could easily be a reference to another character. If you've got any idea who these shapes connect to, be sure to mention them in the comments. And of course, the way spikes protrude out of Frank Stone's body after he winds up thrown into the fire pit look a lot like the metal spikes sticking out of Evan McMillan, the Trapper. There's also a couple of Supermassive Games references to find. If Sam fails his skill check and drops his flashlight, he breaks it in the classic Until Dawn original cover style. Tom smokes Prairie brand cigarettes, the preferred brand of Grantham DeMette, villain of The Devil in Me. Does this mean Frank Stone takes place in the Dark Pictures universe? I'm not saying yes just yet, but I will be watching any crows in Cedar Hills very carefully. Maybe it's a stretch, but Tom's logbook really does have the look of the same leather-bound tomes that the curator keeps the Dark Pictures in. In the very first trailer, we saw this X on the wall and wondered what it meant. Turns out there's a pretty cute answer to that question. It's actually the place where Frank Stone stores his shears, and it looks like an X because he sprayed white paint on the wall while they were already there, leaving a void. Sam can also find the storage points for Frank's hammer, his saw, and his iconic spiky machete thing. Down in the tunnel, Sam can find this necklace with a guy's face on it, likely the property of his sweetheart. Hopefully she's not the person whose skeleton is visible through these bars, but I've got a bad feeling I'm hoping in vain. That's another Frank Stone victim we haven't accounted for yet. There's so much detail to love in Tom's shack. The developers obviously went to town on this location, filling it with as many details as they possibly could to make it feel like a lived-in space. The cigarettes and lighter on the desk, the old-timey radio and traditional brand beer, the jackets hanging on the wall. Even the drawers are filled not just with the plot-relevant liquor flask, but also a loose bolt and a screwdriver. From the flickering lamp to the askew blinds, this is a gorgeous set. While the game's subtitles work great, and are offered in a wide variety of languages, there's an issue with their functionality. In English, players can turn either subtitles or what the developers call closed captioning, which should have all important audio cues. But all it actually adds is captions for Sam's incidental dialogue while walking around.
Things just get weirder and weirder down here.
Useful, but you'll still be missing out on important audio cues, like the fact that you can hear Frank dumping out the bucket of gore from Merlin just as Sam enters the second building. More importantly, even with the captioning on, you won't hear the furnace grate slam down as Sam and Tom leave the second building.
What was that sound?
Ever wonder why Sam decides to check out the furnace tunnels rather than just using Tom's keys to explore the building? It's because he knows someone just went down there based on an audio cue that has no caption to go with it. The lack of captions for other languages also means that hearing impaired players will be missing out on important hints, When Sam is looking for a way into the mill, if the player doesn't immediately spot the open window, Sam will comment on it, hoping to draw their attention to it. Anyone playing with non-English subtitles will not get this information. Now for the bread and butter of these videos, other than crazy theories, which I save for the end. A look at the mistakes, little and large, that appear in the demo. Some are fixable, others less so. When the camera pans around the room during Tom's introduction, his foot moves in front of the lamp's flame. Apparently it's a pretty strong flame, as it's still visible through Tom's foot. This note about the changed shift schedule is written with a font. You can tell that because the M is an absolute madness that I have a hard time believing anyone could draw the same way twice. The person typing out the note accidentally switched from the hand-printed font to the script font for just one letter, the S at the start of the word stone. If Sam goes up the ramp towards his fight with Frank Stone, he can lose his flashlight and the ability to blind Frank if he fails the button mash when climbing up after failing the dodge skill check. Now, when he loses the light in this sequence, he will not be able to do the blinding, but visually, the flashlight teleports back to his belt after falling off and is visible there for the rest of the scene. At the start of the interview with Tom, Sam takes off his hat and tucks it under his arm. The hat then disappears for the rest of the scene, until it magically reappears in his hand just in time for him to put it back on before leaving the office. This issue of the Cedar Hills Tribune is absolutely covered with mud, so I can't read anything but a couple of words, so I can't state whether it's about the game's plot or not. I can, however, read the date, and as a consequence noted this error. According to the newspaper, this issue is for Saturday, September 13th, 1963. Only the 13th of September on 1963 was a Friday, as we can see here on the schedule. Speaking of the schedule, looking over it raises a question about the state of the factory. Where is everybody? According to that schedule, there are theoretically 3 shifts at the mill: 6 to 2, 2 to 10, and 10 to 6. If Sam is getting here a little after 9 p.m., there should still be a bunch of activity at the mill, and Tom shouldn't be anywhere near napping out just yet. So where are all the workers? Did Frank already kill everybody? I feel like there should be some sign of that. Maybe Sam should be arriving at the mill at 11 rather than 9? With the graveyard shift shut down, Frank would have the run of the place. Hey, speaking of that, this is the big one. Simply put, you can't cancel the 3rd shift in a steel mill. They have to be run at 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It takes so long to heat up or cool down the furnace that as long as you're producing anything, the most cost-effective thing to do is to just keep it running constantly. And if the furnace is running, you need people there monitoring it. You can't just leave the furnace alone for 8 hours and hope it's still there when you get back. Realistically, if they're not doing a lot of orders at the moment and have shut down some lines, there should still be a skeleton crew overnight doing nothing but maintaining the furnace. Just a couple of guys, one of whom would be Frank Stone, who is free to do all of his secret murdering and hiding people in his lair. This is a really nice catch by the developers. This is how slabs of metal that come out of the molds are labeled. Workers use wax to register when and from which pour a given slab, bar, or ingot was made. Of course, going to the trouble of including this extra bit of realism means that it's easy to spot that the developers have used the exact same model, with the exact same number, over and over again, which tilts back away from realism. During the opening dog vision sequence, we can see the path that Merlin takes as he goes through the steel mill and jumps outside. This is the gap in the wall that he vaults through, and these are the metal slabs that Sam shimmies between. When Merlin bolts through the warehouse, this pathway is wide open, but when Sam gets there just 5 minutes later, it's filled with slabs of metal and stacked debris. I haven't done enough research into this, so maybe it's completely accurate, but Sam's uniform seems a little older than 1960s, like maybe a 40s or 50s uniform. I could be wrong on that front, but Sam's reaction upon arriving in the furnace is definitely 100% anachronistic. Here's the description of the hillbilly doll. It's not great. Let's go over it together. In the silence that hangs over Coldwind Farm, one must keep their ear to the wind. So, first off, the phrase is ear to the ground, which both means literal ear to the ground to hear approaching hoofbeats, but also pay attention. Also, you don't want to use wind twice in the same sentence, even if one of them is part of a compound word. Then things get really weird with, because even if Max makes no attempt to hide his approach, his vengeance comes with a brutal swiftness. What's the word even doing in that sentence? It seems to be setting the two halves against one another, as if the fact thunders along with no subtlety makes him less likely to attack with brutal swiftness. Isn't it the opposite, though? Wouldn't someone who comes charging at you with a chainsaw be more likely to kill you swiftly and brutally? I feel like this could use a rewrite. This one has been going on for a while. Someone at Supermassive Games doesn't know that the word for replacing one file with another file in the same location is overwrite. So they keep using the term override, which is almost a homonym. This was especially odd in The Devil in Me, where it said override in the text prompt, but the button to perform the action was labeled correctly with overwrite.
Also, there's one too many O's in the word too.
There's a couple of strange glitches in the subtitling. In multiple languages, the Augustine Liber cutscene is not subtitled, even when the rest of the game is. Also, when using Japanese, Chinese, or Thai in-game text, there's no descriptions for the collectibles, just a name and then a series of character missing icons where the description should be. Okay, I've put it off long enough. Let's talk crazy theories. This one is really extremely out there, so please bear with me, especially since it's based on my inability to differentiate between similarly featured faces. Is this lady a slightly older Christine Gordon, director of the film Murder Mill? Maybe? And is she also the ancient string puller Augustine Liber? Also maybe. But how would that be possible? Before we get into the absolutely crazy mechanics of that possibility, let's talk about the evidence pointing in this direction. There's almost none. Basically, the most concrete thing is a physical similarity between the two of them. Beyond that, it's mostly a question of role in the narrative. We've learned that Augustine is the person responsible for the game's title, in that she's the one who's casting Frank Stone as her killer to serve her purposes. And who's responsible for casting people? That's right, a director. Likewise, the look from Frank to who we're assuming is Augustine Liber in the furnace recontextualizes his actions as a performance he's giving at her direction. After all, the details we've seen of his murders so far, taking joy in the slashing and stabbing, reveling in the suffering of others, none of that seems to match the whole kidnapping a baby and sacrificing it to the entity thing he's doing here. In all likelihood, the idea for this came from an outside source rather than his own madness, and if he's operating at the direction of Augustine Liber, what does she hope to accomplish with the sacrifice? So a huge portion of this theory comes down to, are there really going to be two different directors in the story? I mean, yeah, you could have that, and contrasting them against one another could lead to interesting insight. But it seems like a richer dramatic vein to mine is to just have one director being responsible for everything, the movie and the murders alike, with her actions as a director being ironically contrasted with her actions as an ancient schemer later on. Or earlier? It's confusing. If that is the case, if they are one character, how would that be possible? Is the Christine we see in the trailers secretly an immortal monster tricking everyone else into going along with her plan? I don't think so. No, I think it's much more likely that as part of the story, she'll wind up going through that mystery portal we've seen in the trailers and wind up in another dimension, trapped in the past, or possibly both. What does this mean for the story? Largely, it would turn it into a circular time travel paradox narrative, which is one of the most entertaining kinds of time travel stories, in which Christine, as Augustine, would be pulling the strings to ensure that everything she'd already witnessed in the story happened again, because she needs to complete it to do something with the entity. Although I'm obviously not sure what's going on in that part of the story yet. Right now we've got two directors, and we've got two different people who have large collections of entity-themed paraphernalia. The thrift store owner and the owner of Dead by Daylight Manor. What if all of these characters can be compressed down? Could both directors be Christine? Could both collectors also be her? Why is the game so coy about showing us the face of what's presumably Augustine here in the furnace when they just showed it to us in the opening movie? Is it because she's aged considerably since then, and we'd recognize her as the curiosity shop owner? Is this an image of a woman selling her younger self a camera so that she can complete the loop and finally solidify her connection to the entity? Like I said, crazy theory. So, long story short, my second favorite time travel video game of all time is Shadow of Destiny, which is also called Shadow of Memories. It's likely infected my thinking here, because it uses time travel mechanics to create bizarre situations in which you learn that multiple different characters surprisingly turn out to be the same person. No spoilers, you should play the game. Is it a stretch for me to assume that's what's going on here, even though time travel has not been confirmed to be an element in the game? Sure, but what can I say? That's the way the theory is going at the moment. But no. In case you're wondering, I can't explain why she has a different accent now. 100 years spent in England, maybe? Who can say? Just a couple of weeks left, people, and we're going to have all of our questions answered. For now, though, quick sign-off since I'm still on vacation and I have to go record a reaction video to the new Until Dawn trailer. See you back here for more Frank Stone as news allows, but until then I'll say that's right, au revoir.